Hey, so people know that Ice and Fire was influenced by Robert Frost's poem, Fire and Ice. He talked about it here in this interview, yada yada. Both the themes of desire and hatred and how they interact the heart in conflict with itself, and also just the images of these world-ending forces of fire and ice as represented in the story by dragons for fire and the others for ice, these world-ending forces. It's all there. It's from Fire and Ice. And I think most people also know about Mending Wall, which is the story of the wall in a nutshell. It's this wall which is being maintained for reasons of prejudice and suspicion, which are not really justified. The Jon story is him realizing we don't need this wall to keep out wildlings. The wildlings are kin. So anyway, people know about these two. What people don't know about is the generations of men. This is a Robert Frost poem from the same collection as Mending Wall, which I haven't seen anybody talk about. So I'm going to, without going line by line, I'm going to quickly blitz through here and kind of see what poetic images and concepts that I think were swirling around in his head as George is sitting there, reading his poetry, coming up with the concepts that will be turned into the story. So let's go. Right away, you're going to notice that this is a family reunion of people by the name of Stark. So they are gathering in New Hampshire to see the ancestral home of the Starks, or what's left of it. It's a destroyed cottage. All that's left is the cellar, or what used to be the cellar, the crumbling walls of a cellar out in the field. Now, they're all in town for this family reunion, but it's a rainy day, so only a couple people actually walk out there. Most other people are just hanging out in town. But a guy and a girl are bold enough to brave the rain and go check out the site, and they meet each other there, though they've never met before. They are cousins, although removed by 9 generations, very distant cousins. So as they meet, they present one another with these sort of passports that have been handed out. The branch of the one bearing it done in detail. They have a family tree represented to show where they exist in this genealogy, which makes me think of a coat of arms or the heraldry that we see in Ice and Fire. There's a quick discussion of the fact that regardless of whether their names were actually Stark, although both of their names are Stark, they could be a Chase or a Lowe or a Bailey and still be a Stark. The genetics would be hiding just beneath the name. But of course, if your mother was a Stark, you're still a Stark, even if you've taken this patrilineal name. Now, this idea that genetics are hiding beneath the name is something that Preston Jacobs has talked about with the Targaryens. Everyone thinks that it's the Targaryens who can connect with dragons and ride dragons, but really it's probably a gene being passed down through the women, so it's not important that you have the name. There might be someone who does not have the name Targaryen, is not part of the patrilineal patriarchy system and has that power, but still has this power to ride dragons, because the name isn't really what counts. It's brought up that she is a Stark several times over, so introducing the idea of some incest happening. And they agree to sit on one of the cellar walls. They're basically looking at a hole in the ground. The ancestral cottage does not exist, it's been destroyed. But what's left is the cellar, under the shelter of the family tree, they say. There isn't a literal tree here. They have their passports, the family trees, and the family tree originates here. They're at the trunk, metaphorically speaking. But we can't help but think of the literal family trees that we see in Ice and Fire, like the heart tree. And we'll think of it all the more as they sit here, they begin to hear voices and see visions that you might see at the heart tree in Ice and Fire. More discussion of incest. A person so related to herself is supposed to be mad. I may be mad. He asks, what will we come to with all this pride of ancestry? This is a question, of course, that comes up in Ice and Fire. Is there a point to sticking with these names? Aren't we just perpetuating endless cycles of war? Yada yada. What do we see in such a hole? She responds, the Indians had a myth of Chickamaustock, which means the 7 caves that we came out of. This is the pit from which we Starks were digged. Now, if you're a fan of Preston Jacobs, this will set off some alarm bells. We have 7 caves for 7 kingdoms. And of course, the myth of the long night in Ice and Fire is something that he has long related to this idea that we have these tunnels underneath all of the 7 kingdoms, which are talked about all the time. So it seems that during this long night, everyone went underground and then literally came out of these 7 caves to where they are now. And this is also related to this idea of incest, that during this long night, you have this issue with genetics. Again, back to genetics, which is explored in stories like Dying of the Light that George R. R. Martin has written before. So Preston has talked about that, but here it's just being stated outright. You know, the Starks came out of this hole, and they're inbred. So all of these theory ideas, they're just being sort of blatantly expressed to us in this poem that we know George read as he's coming up with this stuff. So very interesting. So moving on, we are going to start seeing visions. I see raspberry vines. Oh, if you're going to use your eyes, hear what I see. It's a little boy, as pale and dim. Hey, it's a pale child. Interesting. Now, what's really going on is they're not seeing visions. Probably they're looking, it's raining, they're looking into the puddles in this hole in the ground, and seeing reflections of each other, and they're teasing each other during this flirtation. So she's saying, I see a little boy who's groping around in the cellar. She's making fun of him and the flirtation. I said I wouldn't go line by line, so I won't go all the way into it. But he responds by saying that he sees a vision of a little old lady, making fun of her, as if, you know, he sees her reflection and thinks that it looks like a little old lady. So, to reiterate, we are sitting metaphorically beneath a family tree and then in jest seeing visions. Now we then move from visions to voices. He says that listening to the brook in the background, he's going to pick out the voices from the noise. And not merely voices, but songs, actually. So we're getting to the song aspect of A Song of Ice and Fire. Still beneath the family tree, still with the inbred Starks, able to see visions and hear voices. Then we have a dispute on, is this a real vision or a voice? As you throw a picture on a screen, the meaning of it is all out of you. The voices give you what you wish to hear. He says, no, strangely, it's anything they wish to give. So we have this dispute over, is it real? Is it fake? Which Preston has gone over again and again and again. This dispute over, is it make-believe? Is it real? Is magic real? Is it something different? Etc. He goes into a trance and then delivers a speech, presumably in the voice of the ancients. She's pushing back a little bit on this flirtation. I'd let you say that. On consideration, I had to think about it. She's not a passive participant in this flirtation. She's pushing back a little bit. He's continuing to tease her. And in the voice of this ancestor speaking through him, he gives her this image of her with flowers in her lap. And at this point, I recall that Rhaegar put flowers in Lyanna's lap at Harrenhal. And there's a few things to relate back here. One is that they're in a ruin. Harrenhal is a ruin. This is a bold girl meeting a man for the first time in a ruin when many people have gathered, but they're the only two out here. And they're talking about genetics and prophecy and flirting, and we have this image of flowers in her lap. So there's lots to make us think of this scene, which is never shown in Ice and Fire, but which must have happened at some point, this first meeting between Rhaegar and Lyanna at Harrenhal before he crowns her. Now that's not an incestuous union between Starks, that might have been where your head was going, but we know that George originally had that idea to have a sort of pseudo-incestuous relationship between Arya and Jon. Maybe that was an idea for this scene to be transposed into at some point, but I believe that this germ became the Lyanna-Rhaegar interaction at Harrenhal, and that those ideas of incest simply bled into the story in different parts. Again, this is being mixed up and regurgitated sort of into the final story. All these ideas aren't going to appear in one piece, but in many different pieces. And after he gives another oracle, which she requests, they leave off by her taking charge. He says, will you leave the way to me for how to say goodbye? She says, no, I don't trust you. She orders him around, takes his hand, says, give me that flower, and then arranges when to meet him again. So if we're relating this to Lyanna and Rhaegar, it would seem that she is taking charge, saying, "Crown me," and then telling him where they can meet again. So she's arranging her own kidnapping. And this is an idea that Preston Jacobs has talked a lot about. It seems out of character for this strong, redheaded woman that George R. R. Martin writes so often to just be a sort of passive victim in the story. And that idea that she's a victim is told to us right away by Robert, who seems obviously wrong. So we have this other idea that she was more active, that she was taking charge of this idea and was more than willing, maybe even sort of bullying Rhaegar into doing this. And so the idea is that she is taking an active part, holding her own in this interaction with the man, bossing him around a bit, and is not a damsel. So this girl, like Lyanna, probably, and like Elia Sand, is flirty. She takes charge. She uses innuendo. Here she says, "I won't be teased, but see how wet I am." But again, I won't go line by line through every little flirtatious thing that they say. Read the poem yourself, draw your own conclusions as to the character of the interaction. But to me, it seems very much like a Lyanna or Elia character. The last thing I want to touch on before I leave off is in this first oracle that he delivers, he says, the voices say, "Call her Nausicaa," relating this girl he's flirting with to Nausicaa from the Odyssey. Now, if you don't remember your Odyssey too well, Nausicaa is pretty near at the beginning of the story. Odysseus washes up on the shore. Nausicaa is a princess, and Odysseus, of course, is a king. And Nausicaa is told in a dream by Athena to go down to the shore and find him in order to, like, give him clothes, bring him into the feasting hall or whatever, and be received with hospitality. So the fact that Lyanna is a sort of princess, being the daughter of Stark, and Rhaegar, of course, is a king, we can't help but see the similarities in dynamic between Lyanna and Rhaegar. And we have this idea that she was told to greet him in this way and meet up as they're doing in private in Harrenhal as a result of a dream that Lyanna had, which of course is an idea that Preston has arrived at by other routes. The idea that Lyanna is this one being propelled by prophecy to make this match and somehow produce a savior. So, sorry about my voice, I've been sick, I'm going to cut it off here. You can go through this poem line by line and see more things that George is maybe taking into his head as he is coming up with Ice and Fire. But I think there's enough here to go around. I'm going to call it there. Thanks for watching. Bye.